which is to say that the bank directors are not personally liable for the amount of money that they hold. Previously, only the Bank of England had that thing. And there was also a new standardization of the issuing of banknotes and in what forms banknotes could be issued. And finally, there was the insistence that the linking of the issuing of currency was linked to the possession of gold, okay, to a real value in gold. This is the creation of, well, not the creation, but the consolidation of the gold standard. Okay, now these things combined to make Britain the financial capital of the world by the 1840s, with more capital, more prestige in its currency, and the largest set of financial services, including insurance, anywhere in the world. Agricultural revolution. Stick with me. We're going to get there, I promise. This is a really simple story. Basically, agricultural production doubles between 1750 and 1850. And it's that doubling that plays a big role in the ability of people to be able to move to urban centres. And it happens for a variety of reasons. First of all, there's a program of enclosure where lands that are previously held in common, that is to say anyone had the use of, were increasingly enclosed and turned into private property, okay, by individuals with the backing of the Parliament. This is the creation, basically, of the rule of private property. 7 million acres of land were taken over by enclosure in 4,000 acts during this period of 1750 to 1850, and the vast majority of those were just in the second half of the 18th century. There is an expansion of cultivated land, so there's a whole bunch of land that no one was doing much with, okay, that was suddenly made productive, so that the amount of cultivated land increased from 10 to 15 million acres during this period. And there was an increasing experimentation with agricultural chemistry, okay, with the uses of fertilizers, of crop rotation, the creation of new breeds of cattle, of new sheep, etc., all of which made agricultural production more impressive. And finally, there was the use of good old protective measures to protect British agriculture from that nasty thing called foreign competition. And the key thing here was the introduction of the Corn Laws in 1815. Okay? The Corn Laws introduced to protect the price of British wheat against cheaper foreign imports. And it was introduced basically to help defend aristocratic interests, because it's the aristocracy that owns the land that is producing corn. And I'll have much more to say on that in a minute. Commerce. There are basically two economic philosophies that are at war with each other during the 18th and early 19th century. A mercantilist philosophy that basically believes that wealth is derived from the possession of land and your ability to extract wealth from that land. Okay? Or a commercial view of wealth, a commercial political economy that thinks that basically trade enables you to have an endless supply of wealth. Okay, so one is a sort of zero-sum thing. There's only so much land. You've got to grab what you can because that's the way you generate wealth. The other thinks, hey, trade. Trade, the more you multiply trade, the more wealth you'll get, and that it's infinite. Okay? This is why the mercantilist view is predominant throughout the 18th century. You know, Adam Smith is writing against mercantilism in the 1760s and 1770s. And it's this that creates things like the Royal Africa Company and the East India Company to go out, grab as much land, you know, and do what trade you can there. It also produces the Navigation Acts, an ingenious series of laws that meant that any goods arriving or departing from Britain had to be transported in British ships. And that also applied to any imperial goods. So if you were selling cotton from the south of what became the United States, say you were selling cotton from Virginia, okay, and you were wanting it to sell it to someone in Canada, you'd have to go all the way to London and then back out again to do it, and you would be taxed on it. Okay, and this is an enormous boon to the British Treasury, okay, because there's a huge amount of revenue that came through of the passing of goods through London. It meant that by the middle of the 19th century, London had 4 miles of docks and warehouses along the Thames and accounted for something like 25% of the world's total trade. It was an unbelievably extortionate enterprise. And finally, there is what you associate with the process of industrialization, the creation of industrialized forms of manufacturing, the centralization and mechanization of production, classically associated with the rise of the textile industry and the cotton mill in and around Manchester. Now, your textbook has quite good figures about the numbers of mills, etc., 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 so I'm not going to go over that now. So the mechanization, centralization of production, and then critically the introduction of steam power and the use of coal to increase the productive potential of those mechanized forms of production. Now, it was this series of this combination of processes that basically turned Britain into the workshop of the world, the industrial, the manufacturing capital of the world. Exports rose 400%, GNP rose 300% at an annual growth rate of 2.5% in the first half of the 19th century. This is a growth economy that looks rather like the experience of China over the last decade or so. And I'll come back to the stuff about handcraft next week. Right, I've done that very well. It seems to me very quickly, but actually I can see that I've been talking already for 50 minutes, so you must already be bored rigid and thinking, oh my goodness, when's he going to stop? So I'm going to pause because I have about 8 more slides to go. But does anyone have any questions about that rather complex and dense and packed series of slides and lectures? I've ground you into submission. Excellent. Do you really have the stomach for another 20 minutes? Well, you have no choice, because the next person who walks out the door is going to have something rude said about them. So liberalism. And I'm going to do this again in 3 sequences. I'm going to do it as a set of ideas, a set of theories, as a way of life, and as a political movement. Okay? Now remember, the reason why I'm talking about liberalism is because I'm going to suggest to you that liberalism becomes the dominant way of making sense of this enormous range of economic and social and political transformations that I've been describing to you. It becomes the common sense of the age. Not straightforwardly, not easily, but basically by 1848, I'm going to suggest to you that it has become the natural way to think. So let's start with liberalism as a set of ideas. And, many people will say that this in itself is a joke, because we all know that Britons are profoundly anti-intellectual, is a profoundly anti-intellectual culture, and that Britons don't think, that we leave that to other parts of the world, and particularly to our great friends, the French. But historians over the past 20 years or so have said, look, we have to think of the Enlightenment not as simply a continental European phenomena. We also have to think of it as a British phenomena, and indeed a British phenomena not just because Edinburgh and Scotland was so important to the Enlightenment, but also because there was a particular character to Enlightenment thought in Britain. And it stretches from the scientific revolution in the late 17th century, through Locke, through Hume, through Adam Smith, through Bentham, through Thomas Paine, and through Mary Wollstonecraft. That's quite an impressive list of people, and they're serious thinkers. So a British Enlightenment that we have. Now, what characterises this British Enlightenment was a belief that man could know and master the world through the exercise of reason. Okay, so that the world could be understood rationally. You didn't have to have a divine explanation of the ordering of the world. And indeed, the use of reason would enable you to understand the natural laws that govern the world. So that once you discovered those natural worlds, you could act upon them. Okay? You could manipulate them so that you could actually improve the operation of the world. Effectively, this is the beginnings of the idea that science and technology, reason, science and technology, enables you to master and control the environment and the world around you. Now, in order to do that, the other central element of the Enlightenment was that you had to be emancipated from the idea that you could only ever do things as they've been done in the past. Okay? The Enlightenment, in a sense, embraces radical novelty, in the sense that it allows you to think of the future in new types of ways. It wants to get rid of the idea that you can only do those things that it was customary to do. Custom, superstition, these things had to be done away with. So there are these three elements of liberal thought that I want to very quickly go over, and it will be very quick. I want to look at Locke and the idea of representative politics. I want to look at Smith and Malthus on the economy, and then I'm going to look at Jeremy Bentham and the Mills and their thoughts about civil society. Central to all three of these things was a central problem. How do you remove the obstacles to freedom and progress? Okay, how is it that you get rid of the custom and the tradition of the ancient regime? How is it that you can maximize the liberties of people, of markets, so that progress can unfold? Okay, so right at the beginning, and I'm going to emphasize this right now, right at the beginning is a paradox that I'm going to come back to in the weeks to come. That is that liberalism is faced with this paradox that it has to create new systems of government, new forms of rule,